Joining us on the line is Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Senator Cruz, how are you doing, sir?
Ben, I'm doing terrific. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing pretty well. Man, the news cycle is hot and heavy these days. Obviously, my mind has been on the chaos that just broke in Israel, where Prime Minister Netanyahu is about to be indicted. It's a complete mess over there.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that literally anything could happen over there. What is your sort of take on that breaking news?
Well, it's certainly unfortunate news, and I think Prime Minister Netanyahu has been an extraordinary leader for Israel and an extraordinarily strong friend of America. And I think in particular the role that Netanyahu played when Obama was president of speaking out with a clarion strength against the disaster that was the Obama-Iran nuclear deal. I've referred multiple times to the forcefulness of Netanyahu's message to the world as really being Churchillian with that force and gravitas. And so it is obviously dismaying to see the legal challenges there and obviously the difficulty of forming a government. They've now had two elections and not been able to form a government. It's ultimately up to the people of Israel to decide who their head of state should be. But I certainly hope this gets resolved and we go forward, because Israel is too important of an ally for them not to have a strong and effective prime minister to lead Israel and stand along with America.
What an absolute mess. Well, speaking of absolute messes, I don't know, Senator Cruz, if you had the opportunity to watch the Democratic debate last night, but that was a clown car. I mean, it was pretty wild to watch as a bunch of candidates who theoretically should be, going after each other in search of the nomination decided instead that they were going to just group hug this whole thing out while proposing some of the most radical proposals imaginable. What was your take on the outcome of last night's debate?
So I'll confess I didn't watch last night. I watched the first few, and there's sort of a limit to my masochism. At this point, it is evident where the Democratic field is going, which is that they are galloping to the left. There's no spot too far left for them to go, and the animating force in the Democratic Party is rage. It is rage towards Donald Trump. They hate Donald Trump. That is what unites them as a party, and as a result, they're embracing more and more extreme positions that even a few years ago were fringe positions in the Democratic Party. You look at the leaders among the Democrats. You look at Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. These are fringe leftist candidates. Bernie is an open and avowed socialist. It used to be Democrats pretended they weren't socialists. Now just about every one of them openly embraces the socialist agenda. Just about every one of them openly embraces the Green New Deal, which would be $90 trillion in new government spending, more spending than the federal government has spent in the history of our country. Just about every one of them embraces open borders. Just about every one of them embraces unlimited abortion on demand up to the moment of birth and even after birth with taxpayer funding. And just about every one of them embraces full-on socialized medicine, making it illegal for you or me or any of us to have the health insurance we have right now. I mean, these are radical, extreme positions, and yet you see these Democrats lining up and raising their hands like lemmings wanting all of America to jump off a cliff.
I mean, Senator Cruz, I will admit that I found it very amusing to listen to the Democrats last night. You missed it, but it was pretty funny to watch them list off their credentials for being president of the United States. Aside from Joe Biden, who actually has served, in Congress for years, served in the Senate for years, was vice president, actually has his name on some legislation. You had Bernie Sanders saying that he was worthy of the job because he's been a career useless person. You had Pete Buttigieg explain that he is worthy of being president of the United States after winning his biggest election with a grand total of 11,000 votes in South Bend, Indiana, because he is the least wealthy person on stage. That was literally his pitch, is that he is not wealthy, therefore he should run the world's largest economy. You had Kamala Harris explain that she is part of the intersectional coalition. And these are not folks who have a strong leg to stand on when it comes to a record of achievement, it seems to me.
I think that is right, and they also don't have a vision that makes sense for America. Look, the number one priority from Texans, my job is to represent 28 million Texans. That's what I go to the Senate to do each and every day. What Texans care about is jobs. We want more jobs. We want higher wages. We want more opportunity. What Texans care about is security. We want our homes safe. We want our borders secure. We want the nation kept safe. What Texans care about is freedom. We want our constitutional rights protected. We want free speech and religious liberty and the Second Amendment and all the fundamental liberties that we enjoy as Americans protected. That is a common sense agenda that has wide bipartisan support among the voters, and yet the clown car that is the Democratic 2020 primary field is talking about none of that, and in fact, they're opposed to every bit of that. You've got Elizabeth Warren proposing not just repealing the tax cuts, but imposing massive new tax increases that would be crippling to the economy, and that. I never thought I'd say it, but I look longfully back towards the days of a Bill Clinton, where there was something resembling a Democrat who was willing to say, gosh, jobs are good. None of these people believe this. The only jobs they want is more government tax collectors to kick down the doors and take your guns. That's the only jobs they have. They're not going to have any Border Patrol agents. They're not going to deport anyone. They're going to have open borders. So apparently the only jobs on earth are IRS agents and welfare agents giving out cash. Half the people are taking our money. The other half are giving it away to people who aren't working. That's their agenda. And I got to say, Ben, that's nuts.
That's pretty astonishing. Well, meanwhile, you've been co-sponsoring the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act. Obviously, things are getting quite ugly over there with the Chinese government violating the rights of the people of Hong Kong. The British, it seems to me, never should have given up sovereignty over Hong Kong to a communist Chinese government that had no intention of moderating. The failure of the West to understand that the Chinese government was never going to moderate just because their income went up through free trade. It never fails to astonish. So what is the situation over in Hong Kong, and what is this bill designed to do?
Well, I'll say what's happening in Hong Kong right now is both deeply dismaying and incredibly inspirational at the same time. What is dismaying is we're seeing a brutal crackdown from the Chinese communist government, where they're trying to use brute force to suppress freedom and democracy in Hong Kong. Now, what's inspirational is we're seeing millions of men and women in Hong Kong leading protests, going to the street. I was in Hong Kong just last month. I went there. I met with the protest leaders. I met with democracy activists. Many of them are young people, are students, are young men and young women who are going out and, risking their lives. We're seeing Chinese communist police officers violently assaulting the protesters, violently engaging, shooting one in the stomach, an unarmed protester, shooting him with a firearm in the stomach, firing rubber bullets at other protesters. We're seeing brutality, and I think the eyes of the world are on Hong Kong. I've said many times now, Hong Kong is the new Berlin. And just a couple of weeks ago, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And just as Ronald Reagan stood before the Brandenburg Gate and said the most important words any leader has said in modern times, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Likewise, those protesters on the streets of Hong Kong who are waving American flags, who are singing the American anthem, who are holding up signs with quotes from our founding fathers, they are fighting for liberty, they are fighting for democracy, and the Chinese Communist government is terrified. They are terrified that 1.3 billion Chinese men and women will see that and want freedom too. And so I was very glad this week to go to the Senate floor to join with other senators, Democrats and Republicans, in passing legislation that has America standing with Hong Kong, standing with the protesters, and standing up to the Chinese communist oppression.
Let's talk for just 1 second about the impeachment inquiry. So The polls are actually swinging, it appears, against the Democrats on the impeachment inquiry. Democrats continue to trot this thing forward, presumably hoping that it will actually hurt Trump in the election because they know this is going nowhere in the Senate. What's your take on this fact pattern overall?
Well, I think that's right. I think what's happening in the House has become an absolute circus, and House Democrats have given up on any pretense of fairness or objectivity. If you look at previous impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives, if you look at the proceedings with Richard Nixon, if you look at the proceedings with Bill Clinton, in both instances, the House made a real effort to be fair, to be objective, to allow both sides to present their case. They allowed the minority to subpoena witnesses so that you had a full and complete record. In this instance, House Democrats departed from past practice, and they said the minority can call no witnesses. We're not going to allow the minority to have subpoena power. And instead, what they're engaged in, this is a show trial. It is a propaganda trial where the House Democrats will only listen to testimony they believe supports their narrative, and they don't allow the defense to present any facts on the other side. And I think the American people see this. This is not a fair and objective process designed by the House to find out facts, to find out evidence. It has a preordained conclusion, which is House Democrats decided in November of 2016 they wanted to impeach Donald Trump because they're mad at the American people for electing him. And all of this is a show trial towards a preordained conclusion. Now, the good news is when the House votes to impeach, and I believe House Democrats will largely on party line vote, when it comes to the Senate, I hope and believe the Senate will do much better, that we will have a fair proceeding. We will have a proceeding that respects due process, that allows both sides to present their case, that allows both sides to be able to call witnesses and address evidence. And I think the show trial House Democrats are doing are only undermining their case because it makes it very clear it is a partisan proceeding rather than a proceeding governed by rule of law.
Now, Senator Cruz, one final question for you on this. If it reaches the Senate, which it likely will, I can't imagine a situation in which House Democrats don't vote for impeachment, and this reaches a Senate trial, should the Senate call some of the witnesses that the Democrats will not call, including folks like Hunter Biden, including perhaps people who will talk openly about the identity of the whistleblower who got this whole case started in the first place? Yeah, how broad should the impeachment inquiry be in the trial once it gets to the Senate?
Well, I think that's very likely. I think that any proceeding in the Senate should be fair, it should be open, and it should respect due process. What does that mean? That means allowing both sides to present their case. And if the White House chooses to call as a witness Hunter Biden, if the White House chooses to call as a witness the whistleblower, I think they should be allowed to call them. I think both of those witnesses in particular may well be integral to the White House's defense. And the position of the House of Representatives is they're an ostrich sticking their head in the sand. They're like, no, we won't hear any arguments for the defense. It's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. Verdict first, trial later. That's where the House of Representatives is. Their verdict is impeachment, and they don't want to have a trial. And so, yes, if the president's defense team wants to call Hunter Biden or wants to call the whistleblower or any other fact witnesses that are critical to their defense, of course they should be allowed to call them, because that's what due process mandates, is that both sides be able to present their case and that it be decided on actual facts and not just a political hit job.
Well, Senator Cruz, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for your work out there.
Appreciate it, Ben. Thanks for all you do.